Okay, this tutorial is continuing from the previous one where we modeled the fireplace. We're now going to work on putting materials on it and creating a render. So there's a few things I want to do that I forgot to do during the modeling process. The one is to name the different objects. It's really quite important to do that. So I'm going to select that and give it the name of room. And I'll hide them as I go so that I know that I've named them. So I'll hide that. This object is going to be fire. This will be step. This will be rug. This will be coals. And this will be grid. Okay, I'll unhide all. And then something else is the fire object. I actually want it to be a little bit bigger here, so I'm just going to use my scale tool. I'm going to scale that up a bit and then just move it up so that it fills that whole area, and then just scale it in a little bit. Okay. The coal object, which remember I put various modifiers on, I want to collapse that down to an editable poly. It's just going to work better that way. So I'll right click, collapse all, yes, and then right click editable poly. And then I'm also going to apply a UVW map to it. That just helps with the mapping of materials onto the object. So I'll go and find UVW map, and I will put it on planar and on the z-axis. Okay, that'll work for me there. The other thing I need to do is this room is a little bit narrow. If I get a camera with an angle, it's going to catch the edge of the wall here. So I want to just extend that. So I'll select there and go to edge, and I will select that edge and double click, and then with my move tool I'll just move that out. And the same this side. Double click, move that out, just to give us plenty of space if the camera needs an angle. One more thing is that some of these edges are very hard, and in real life you don't really get hard edges like this. Edges are always a little bit rounded. So under edge mode, I'm going to select some of the most important edges, going around the object. I'm not going to take the really small edges that the camera is not going to get too close to, but just the primary edges. Okay, let's see if I've missed any here. Okay, got those. Oh, and there's one there, and then also there, and there, and on the inside. There and there. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is click on the chamfer settings button, and I will just set the chamfer to 1 centimeter and set the number of segments to 3. So what that does, if I zoom in, is you'll see that it makes those edges more rounded, which is more like the way things work in real life. Okay, and I'm going to also do it with the step. So I'll take the step object, I'll convert it to an editable poly, I'll go to edge mode, and I'll pick those most important edges that are going to be visible to the camera. And I'll set it to the same settings. Okay. Alright, so that's just some modeling additions that I've done before I begin with the material application. So I will select the rug, and I'm going to apply a UVW map to it. It just helps with the arranging of the material afterwards. And then I'll bring up the material editor, M. Now this map here is the one that we use to displace the coal object. So we don't need it anymore, seeing as we flattened that object. So I'll bin that. Then I also need to bring up my mental ray materials here. Now, in order to do that, I need to activate the mental ray renderer. So I'm going to go to my rendering menu, render setup, and then to the renderer and change it from default scanline renderer to mental ray. And when I close that, you'll see now I have my mental ray materials here. I'll double click on Arc and Design, double click again on that, and give it the name rug. And I'll also assign it to the selected object from this button, assign material to selection, and also say that I want to see it in my viewport when I work on it. And this red line here is telling me that this should be visible when I change it. So now I'm going to choose a template called matte finish, and then the color I'm going to choose a bitmap which I downloaded off the internet called Oriental Rug. Okay, so now I can actually see that Oriental Rug on the surface here, and I can use my UVW map gizmo to actually adjust it. So I'm going to go to the scale tool, and I just want to get a close-up, and I want to just scale this a little bit up, okay, and a little bit wider, just so that I get rid of that sort of beige border. Okay, that's exactly what I want. Okay, now I need a bump map. So a bump map is basically a map that tells Studio Max to render this object using a certain bumpiness. So carpets are quite bumpy, they're not smooth surfaces. So I'm going to copy this material, and I'm going to go down to the special purpose maps and to bump, and I'm going to paste it into the bump button there, and then I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to change the image. So here is where the image goes, so I'll click, and I have an image called rug bump, and click open, and let me just show you what that image looks like. It's actually just a kind of rough surface in the shape of kind of a weave of some sort, which will work quite well for a carpet. Now I want to actually see this in my viewport while I'm working on it, so I'm going to double click on that bump map here, and I'm going to say show in viewport. So now I can actually see that bump map, and I need to make this bump map a lot smaller. So in my tiling area, I'm going to increase the tiling, and I think I'll go for 20 by 20. Okay, so that gives it quite a tight grain. If I get in close there, you can see that. And ooh, okay, 20 by 20. Okay, that's better. Okay, so now you can see that grain, which is great. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the original rug surface and say show in viewport, and that's the rug now ready to go. Just a few things I want to change here is in the basic parameters, reflection. A rug is not very reflective, so I'll put that up to say 0.2. It's not very glossy, so I'll set the glossiness also to 0.2. Okay, and the rest can stay the same. Store this one step, so I'm going to select it, apply a UVW map. I just get into the habit of doing that. Some people might think it's overkill, and I'll say yes, this is a box object, and I'll say fit. So now it knows to map the surface using a box projection map. Okay, here is my rug. I'm going to right click and say hide child tree, and then collapse it down and just move it over here, and I'll apply another Arc and Design material, double click on it, and I'll call it step. I'll apply it to that step and say show. So the first thing I need to do is set the color for this. So it's going to be a kind of sandstone color, so I'll click there and choose a kind of sandstone color. Okay, and because this is the sandstone material I'm going to actually use over and over again, I may as well just call it sandstone instead of step. So let me do that, sandstone. And the next thing I need to do is give it a bit of a rougher surface. I don't want it to be smooth, highly glossy. So I'll choose matte finish, and then I will bring the glossiness down, And then for the bump map, instead of using an image, this time I'm going to use a map. So I'll click on where it says bump, I'll click on none, and I will choose noise. And so we can see here now we have this noise map. So I'm going to double click on that and say show in viewport, so we can actually see, at the moment you can see that noise is quite big. So I'm going to need to bring the tiling down quite significantly. So I'll tile it 50 by 50 by 50. And let's just get in a bit closer and see what that looks like. Okay, I think it might still be a little bit heavy. So let's do 100 by 100 by 100. Okay, I think that'll work. Okay, then back to the sandstone and show in viewport. Okay, and I'll right click, hide child tree, and collapse that and put it down here. So that's the step done. There it is. And I'll add an arc design. Double click on it and I'll just call it matte black. And I'll choose a matte finish, and my color I will set to black, and we'll have very low reflectivity, about 0.1 or 2, and very low glossiness, let's say also about 0.2. Okay, and we'll apply that and also show it, and collapse that, and that is done. Okay, so we've got the coals to do next, so I'll select that and apply an arc design material, double click on it, and I'll call it coals. And for this one, we're going to, what we want is it to be sort of like black coals around the outside and white hot coals on the inside glowing. So I'm going to just choose a standard matte finish, and then for the color I'm going to choose map, and I'm going to choose gradient ramp. Okay, and then I'm going to assign it and show it, and now we need to actually see that gradient ramp in here. So you can see it's going from black on the left to white on the right. So what I want to do is I want to change the type of gradient. So I'm going to double click on the gradient here, and I'm going to change it to gradient type radial. So now you can see it goes towards the center. So if I adjust this, you can see that we get more black coming in from the center. So what I'm going to do is change this color on this side of the gradient to black, and this color to a very hot yellow, white yellow color. Okay, then this color here is also going to be black, and that will control how much of that yellow we get. So I'm going to bring that out. Then I'm going to put in another color stop here, and I'll make that a hot orange color. And then one more color here, which will be a red, darker red color, indicating heat. Okay, and I'll just move those out a bit. Okay, so you can see that it looks like we have something hot in the middle going out to cooler on the outside. So now this is not only going to be a material, it's actually going to give off light. So what I need to do is go back to the original material and copy that map from the color channel and go down to self-illumination. Open that up and activate it and paste my map into this filter color. And then also set my luminance to physical units, and most importantly, activate illuminates the scene when using FG, which stands for final gather. That just means that the light that's being given off by this will actually be calculated into the scene as though it is an actual light. So I'll put that on as well. Okay, we might have to come back later and tweak this physical units to make it brighter or dimmer, but we'll see once we start to get around to rendering. So I will hide my child tree, close that, and that's the coals done. Okay, so the next part of this is to work on the actual room. So this, remember, we created different IDs, one for floor, one for wall, one for the chimney, one for the fireplace, and one for the inside of the fireplace. I think we had 5 in total. So whenever you are applying a material to an object that has many IDs, you need to use something called a multi-sub object. So I'm going to double click on that, and then double click on it again and call it room. Then I'll set the number of IDs here. So remember, we set 5 IDs, so I'll bring that down to 5, and I'll just give them a name. If I remember correctly, the first one was floor, the second one was wall, the third one was chimney, the fourth one was fireplace, and the fifth one was inside of the fireplace. Okay, I'm going to apply that to the room object, and then I can start actually wiring in different materials for this. So for the fireplace, we need this sandstone material that we made earlier on. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and drag a copy of that sandstone, and I'm going to place it here, double click on it, and just call it fireplace, and wire that into the fireplace material. Okay, then we have matte black, so I'm going to Shift drag to make a copy of that, and that will be the inside of the fireplace. So I'll rename that to inside, and I'll wire that into there. Okay, then the chimney is going to be its own material, and so will the wall and the floor. So let's do the easy ones first. So I'll make a new Archon design, and I'll double click on it, and I'll call it wall. Okay, I'm just going to close this up and then wire that into the wall ID. And then all that we're going to do with that one is we're going to choose a matte finish and then a lightish gray color. Okay. For the chimney, okay, I'm going to make a copy of this wall, so Shift drag, double click and call it chimney, and wire that into the chimney ID, and I will set the color to just be a darker gray, so the chimney is kind of an accented gray color. And then lastly, the floor, another Archon design material, I'll call it floor, and position that here and wire it in. And then also with the floor, because this is the only one of those materials that I need to work on with a map at the moment, with it double clicked, I'm going to say show in viewport. So now I'm just going to get a view of that, and I'm going to choose a pearl finish, because the floor, I don't want it to be glossy, but I don't want it to be very matte either. So pearl should be a good finish for it. And then the color map is going to be a bitmap, and I have one here called laminate flooring. So you can see now it shows that laminate flooring, and I now need to just change some of the settings for that. So for the room object, we have a UV map applied, and I'm going to just go into the laminate flooring map here, and I'm going to start working with the tiling. So I want it to be a bit tighter, and I also want to rotate it, so I think it'll be 90 degrees on the W, that's right. And let me just bring in that floor a bit tighter so that the slats are a little bit more realistic. Okay, and then back to the original floor material. Reflectivity, I'll take that up to 0.5, and the glossiness to 0.5, And I'm going to copy that map and go down to the bump map, and I'll paste it in there so that it's got a little bit of a bump. But what I want is to also invert the image. So if I go to that map here, and this is what we're looking at the moment, this is the map. The bump map uses the lightest colors to push the pixels up and the darkest colors to push the pixels down. So what we actually need is this image to be inverted so that the lightest pixels become the darkest pixels and vice versa. So I'm going to go down to output and just choose invert, and then back to the floor material, and for the bump I'm just going to take that bump down to 0.2, so it's just very subtle. Okay, so if I just get a view of that and just do this is a very rough render. I haven't set up any lighting or cameras yet. Let's just see what we get with that. Okay, so we've got our sandstone, our coals. We haven't done the fireplace, the actual fire flames yet. We'll do that next. But otherwise everything else looks like it's ready to move on to the next stage. Okay, so now we're doing the final part, and possibly the real purpose of this exercise is to put the flames on the fireplace. So I'm going to select the fireplace object. I'm going to apply a UVW map just as a force of habit. And then for our multi-sub object, I'm going to hide all the child tree objects, collapse it down and pop it down here, and apply a new Archon Design material, and I'll call it Fire. Okay, and I'm going to set the reflectivity down to 0, the glossiness down to 0, and for the color I'm going to choose the map button and choose a bitmap. And here I actually have a little AVI video file which I just found by googling it on the internet, of basically a fire, just a little looping clip of a fire. So I'm going to choose that and place it in there, and then assign this material and show it. Okay, so there's our fire. Now just some of the things we have to do here is we need this fire to actually give off light, and we also need the black parts of this plane to be transparent so that we can see the back. So first of all, to make this fire actually give off light, we're going to do the same as what we did for the coals. We're going to copy it, go down to self-illumination, activate it, paste it into the filter color, set it to physical units, and illuminates the scene when using Final Gather. Okay, then what I'm going to do is take that same fire clip, and I'm going to go down to my maps and to cutout, and I'm going to paste it into cutout. And what that means is that it's using the light pixels to show and the black pixels to hide. So now you can see that we actually have our fire see-through, in other words, around the fire. Now, just to show you what this looks like as a little movie clip, I'm going to close my material editor and just position this in the middle, and I'm just going to press play. Okay, so you can see we've got a little fire going on there, which actually looks pretty neat. Alright, and that's how you would set up the flames in the fireplace. Okay, so now that we've done all the materials, I'm just going to clean this up a little bit in the material editor and close that down altogether and get a nice camera view. Okay, that's about nice, and I want to set up a camera. So the easiest way is, once you've got your view, you go to create cameras, and I'm going to choose create standard camera from view. And if I go to my modify tab, I now have my camera settings, so I can adjust my field of view. Okay, and various other settings. I'm going to leave the camera at its default, and then what I'm going to do is just do a test render before we put any lighting in. So I'm going to go to my render setup, and we'll just choose okay, 640 by 480 is fine, and we'll just choose to render. Okay, so everything is very blown out because we don't have any lights in the scene, so the default lights are being calculated here. So we need to put in some lighting. So I'll close that down. I'll go to my 4 viewports and go to create lights, I'll choose standard lights, and I'll choose a mental ray area omni light and click in the fireplace. And then I'm going to just move that light up into the fireplace area. And in the modify tab, I need to make some changes here. So I need the light to not be as intense as this. So I'll bring it down. Let's try 0.4 to begin with, and I'll change the color to more of a kind of yellowy fire color. Probably a bit too strong. Okay, let's do another test render. Okay, so what we're getting is some nice lighting, some nice reflections. This reflection here actually is a bit too strong because it's actually the light reflecting and not the flames. So back in the light parameters, we need to find the section where we can turn that off. So here under advanced effects, I'm going to turn off specular. Specular is kind of the shiny spots that you get on things. And let's try one more. Okay, so that's looking a lot better. We're getting the flame being reflected and not the light, which is exactly what I want. Now I need to just change the size of this area light so that its shadows are a little bit softer. So under the area light parameters, I will just take the radius up a bit. Okay, and under shadow parameters, okay, everything is actually fine there. So let's try another render and see what we're getting now. So you can see our shadows are much softer, which is what we want. It does take a little bit longer to render, but that's just the price we pay for a better quality render. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So now we're going to put in the other omni light, which is just going to be a fill light. So another MR area light, omni area light, and I'm just going to click over here and just put it at the back here and then move it up a bit, and then set the color to also the same kind of yellowy color, and the intensity needs to come down quite significantly, so I'm going to bring it down to like 0.1. should be good. Okay, let's do a test render of that. Okay, alright, so now I'm ready to put in a little bit of animation to the camera. So I'm going to go back here and select the camera object, and then at frame 0 I'm going to put auto key on and click on set keys. So the camera starts in that position, and then I'm going to go to frame 100, and in the top viewport I'm just going to move the camera across like that and set another keyframe and turn auto key off, and now I just need to take the camera target and make sure that it's always on the fireplace. So now when we scrub the timeline, we've got the camera going like that. So that's exactly what I want. So I'll just save it at this stage, and now we need to set up our render. So under render setups, render setup, I'm going to say range 0 to 100 frames, and I should choose a high definition value. That's 1920 by 1080 because that's the best quality, but that's going to take quite a while to render, so I'll choose something a bit smaller than that. So I'll go for 640 by 480. 640 by 360, that maintains the ratio. And then under render output files, I'm going to, in the render output folder, I'm going to create a new folder called image sequence, and I'll set it to output to JPGs starting with 01. and save and set it to maximum quality and OK. So that means when I render, it's going to render out each frame as a JPG image, and there'll be 100 images. This is by far the best way of rendering. Don't render straight out to a movie file format, because you're going to lose quality. Okay, so I'm going to start the render, and then we'll come back once that's completed. Okay, so that's the render finished. What I have done is just taken the individual image sequence and put it together in Premiere Pro into this little movie clip to give you an idea of what the final product looks like. So that's it, how to create a fireplace and render it out and put materials on it. I haven't spent a lot of time on render setup, but I still think this is a pretty acceptable result. I hope you found this short tutorial helpful and informative. I will be adding more tips and tricks videos to my YouTube channel regularly, so please subscribe and return here every few weeks. Thanks for watching.